Hey everybody, thanks for taking the time. Love the chance to connect with the community for sure. I'm a big fan of tool libraries and lending things, so happy to be able to provide some of my insight. I'm by no means a subject matter expert, and so I think these opportunities to connect as a community are super, super helpful. We're going to be covering selection, acquisition, management, and maintenance in terms of your inventory. So prioritizing, figuring out what are the right things for your community, establishing a policy to make sure that those things stay consistent, then getting them, managing them, keeping them, and then eventually getting rid of them. Eventually, sadly, all of our tools will continue on into the great beyond. So making sure we're being responsible with those things as much as possible. A little bit about me real quick. My name is Jason Nauman. I live in Portland, Oregon. I've been involved with tool libraries for about 9 years as a volunteer, taken on a little bit more active role in the last several years in Southeast Portland. First and foremost, setting priorities. We talked a little bit about this in the last session, but trying to really balance these three pillars. So your community's needs starts with figuring out what is available. You can scan the web or do whatever, driving around, trying to figure out exactly what your community already has. There's just not enough resources really to have a lot of redundancy in terms of funding. So if you have other organizations, you don't want to be drawing out their capacity funding wise or volunteer wise. And we really can be more effective if we're elevating each other, keeping that available, knowing what's available, and then knowing what's not available, really figuring that out, starting with community needs surveys, or just reaching out, talking to your neighbors, getting a general idea. You probably, hopefully, have been in your neighborhood for a while and you have a feel for some of those things yourself. Finding out what's cost restrictive, if there are some things that are available that are just not accessible to a significant portion or any portion of your community, really. Trying to make sure things are more equitably distributed. And then looking at what your community desires. The general guiding rule that I have, I think it's good to ask big questions. Let people dream a little bit yourself, maybe dream a lot. Try to avoid making big promises because that could get you into deep water. But it's okay to make big plans. And if people have big ideas with you, it's a great opportunity to bring them in as volunteers, figuring out what people are interested in. Maybe your community is really interested in clothing repair, and setting up a mending circle is a great way to bring people in. And that's certainly going to affect what your inventory develops as. Maybe you think that everybody should pull out their lawns and put in pollinator habitats, but maybe your community isn't interested in that. Definitely getting some kind of an assessment of where other people are at, and then thinking about cultural values too. One example I have is in Lents, we have been doing a lot of pollinator habitat development, trying to support the food ecosystem, get a lot of native plants that are better for building soil and water retention, that sort of thing. One of our sister neighborhoods in Cully really has a very strong food production gardening community. They've got bigger lots and just a lot of people produce their own food. So being aware that where you end up placing your location and how big of an area you're serving, different interests, different values. Maybe your community really likes decorative flowers. I know I'm talking a lot about gardening here, but obviously there's lots of different overlap, different things there. Considering all of those things, and again, making sure you're reaching out and connecting with all the parts of your community to get an accurate assessment there. And then finally, balancing those things with your organizational goals. So maybe community access is really top priority for you. Maybe you're trying to establish more community sovereignty, right? Maybe you really want to have workforce development. Maybe you want to have leatherworking and try and get more people connecting and coming together to do craft projects. Maybe your community needs a lot of restoration work. And so that's going to shape the tools or the things that you're bringing into your library, and really balancing all of those things together. And then I think the other really important thing here is to think about how it's benefiting yourself. Most active tool librarians start out as active tool borrowers. So thinking about you and what you would like to borrow is a great place to start. And importantly, as you're doing this process, bringing in other members of your community, making sure that you're representing with a diverse board and operations team so that the you that you're trying to serve really is going to be reflective of your whole community. You, as an organization, can come to hold some levers of power and shape the way things are advancing in the community and bringing in other partners to make those things happen. It's really important to just be reflective of everyone in your community. Looking at practical considerations. So liability is going to be a big one. Dangerous, complicated tools. I'm not saying don't have a table saw, but be aware the table saws are dangerous things. And just being aware of all those things, some tools can translate to specific cost in terms of your insurance. And that's a conversation for another day, but being aware of that. And I would also say complicated is a big thing. Tools that are maybe going to be used near power lines or gas lines or anything like that, just be aware of those things. And if a tool involves reading a manual in order to use it successfully without hurting yourself or damaging the tool, maybe not the tool for a library of things, in my personal experience. And that leads right into longevity. So keeping in mind that every tool that comes in is going to be used more than you ever would expect. Most manufacturers test their tools pretty extensively, but most tools are going to be used, if not every week, for a good portion of the year, sometimes multiple times a week. They're going to see a lot of use. So whichever method you use to acquire your tools, keep in mind that it's going to be used repeatedly and occasionally misused. So things like safety features, if those aren't going to withstand repeated impact, maybe consider getting a different type of tool. Cost is going to be a factor, and not just the initial cost of your tool, or your thing rather, but the replacement cost. So once you've set an expectation that you have these things available, you want to keep in mind that you might have to replace that thing. And then if there are significant consumable parts, whether that's saw blades or sanding pads or other things like that. I know some libraries, our library specifically, we tell people like the consumables are part of your use. And so you need to buy those and replace those yourself. But that's not always the case, not with every tool. I think if you're going to rent out, for example, a table saw without a blade on it or a dull blade on it, that's going to be a real problem. So just keeping that in mind. Portability. The rule we have here is, the rule I like to repeat is, if it fits in the back of a hatchback, that's going to be specific to your community. So some communities, it's going to be the back of a pickup truck. Some communities, it's going to be the back of a bicycle. Maybe you got to be able to take it on the bus or the train. So really dialing that in to be specific to what your community's needs are, and how your community is going to transport those things. Storage is a really big factor. Space can be at a premium, especially in urban areas like Portland. You want to be thinking about not just length, width, and height, but then also odor and environment, how that's going to affect the environment of your library, how that's going to affect the lending environment, the storage environment. So some places, I know our lease, we're not allowed to have any gas tools because we're only open 2 days a week. So find that out. If you have a space or you don't have a space yet, find out what you're allowed to have. There's other things beyond just gas, like chainsaws, for example, are going to have chain and bar oil. They're going to leak no matter what you do, especially if it's getting heavy use. So that's going to affect your space. Might be a problem if you're renting commercial space. So just thinking about long-term storage and how that's going to work out. And then human impact. So the cost of production and disposal can be measured in a lot of different ways. One of those ways we want to think about is, are there conflict minerals? Are there other things that are not being ethically sourced and brought in? If there are ways to build out your inventory in a more socially responsible way, so that we're supporting circular economies, supporting different things that are really in line with organizational ethics and personal ethics as well. It's important to keep that in mind. So a lot to balance.